My name is Matt, and welcome to episode 4 of Small Talk Tech, the podcast interview series where I look to uncover more similarities than differences in what makes people in tech tick. Micah Carroll is a product designer over at Ring. With his skills in front-end development and UI design, he's also increasing his intelligence within print and advertising design. We get deep into topics like Stoicism, social media, tackling inspiration, and a bunch of productivity hacks. The next episode of Small Talk Tech starts now.
Well, my name is Micah Carroll, and currently by trade, I'm a product designer working with Ring. It used to be a startup. We recently got acquired by Amazon, so I guess that makes me an Amazon employee now.
Very exciting.
Very exciting. I'm 22, so I think I'm the youngest employee at the job. In terms of my background and where I started, when I left high school, I went to school for computer science. I quit computer science when I was in college. Within like 2 years, I realized that level of programming really wasn't for me. And that also segues over to how I discovered design. And so I discovered design in the meantime while my internet wasn't so great in my dorm. I just did a whole bunch of Photoshop tutorials. I worked in forums, did a whole bunch of like forum signatures with like anime and stuff. And two and two kind of led together. And next thing you know, I'm discovering the world of user interface design and advertisements. And then I scored an internship with Ring. And then one day they brought me onto the team, and that's kind of how I jumped into the magnificent world of startup tech and learned about more programming on the front end side. The humble beginning for me, I guess you could say.
So being in product design, what are some of your favorite methods of trying to chase inspiration when you're feeling maybe not 100% inspired or creative in like a certain day or for a certain project or just any time in general?
There's a number of ways that I go about, problems like that whenever I feel as if, I can't push out the problem solution, because, product design is mostly, a lot of it I've realized has to do with just figuring out, certain solutions on like, how do we get this amount of users to download the app? And a lot of it I've noticed has to do with the intangibles versus, actually painting, or, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes, whenever I'm in a rut, I know most people say, a lot of programmers do this as well. They go out for a walk or they kind of detach from those kind of things. And that's one thing I do. The second, which I actually find, I guess you could say, the low key solutions to, those creativity blocks, is searching in places that aren't meant for, creative blocks. For example, even watching anime or going to some sort of really obscure location, or just doing something that doesn't have to do so much with creativity, and then looking at things from a different perspective, I realize often helps me. It's like, this is how they did this in a video game UI. Maybe I can apply the way this video game UI is within this smart doorbell.
Mm-hmm.
So you take these certain perspectives, and I'm sure people can apply this to programming as well. You dive into a whole different world. Often, the solution might be there in just a whole different viewpoint. Third, I would go back to meditation. Definitely is something that is the third point on how I would solve my little creative blocks, is, going deep down, looking within oneself. I've realized is super helpful in terms of a lot of problems within life. It's definitely something that, it's amazing.
Since daylight savings time, my routine has just completely evaporated. I've had a lot of different issues getting back into the swing of things because I'm used to waking up early and having the sun outside, and now I wake up and it's pitch black out. Where do you usually turn to try to recalibrate yourself and get back into having more of a disciplined type of attack when it comes to, meditation, or even, with product design, or maybe if things are starting to pile up?
When things are like piling up, or let's say we have a routine that, it's really hard to keep track of. And I know everyone's human. There are some days where I'll wake up and I just totally forget about meditating. When I talk to my mentor, one thing that I do is I have a whiteboard in my room. It doesn't have to be too big. And I suggest this for a lot of people, actually. I have a whiteboard and I have these different activities. For example, it's meditation, reading, working out, just things that you want to build in a routine in your lifestyle. And every time I do that, I have these blank circles, and I have 10 circles, and it's pretty much like a little grid. But every time I meditate, I'll fill it in the circle. And so every time I walk in my room, it's like, boom, it's a constant reminder. Oh, crap, I forgot to meditate today. I should probably do that. Or I forgot to, write my morning pages. All it pretty much is a reminder. And when you find yourself falling off, you need to sometimes give yourself a little bit of a hint, a reminder. Another way to go about it is like on your phone, you can set alarms during the day. For example, I have a few ones like breathe. At like 3 o'clock, I always have a reminder that tells me to breathe. So these reminders all kind of line up to, designing your optimal lifestyle to help you solve those problems within, product design or programming.
Interesting. I like that breathe idea. I think I'm going to probably actually steal that because it's easy to get stuck in the trenches of, working, especially in technology period, working on computers. It is a very isolating type of field in some aspects when you really sit down and go through the nitty gritty of trying to fix something. And it is good every once in a while, even if you're in a great groove and feeling like, you know what, I'm so close to the end, to just take a step back and just breathe and kind of recollect yourself. And you might even find that you finish whatever you're trying to work on even sooner than that.
Have you ever heard of like I think it's pronounced the Pomodoro timer?
I have not, no.
Oh man. What it essentially is when you're working on something, we supposedly have a certain amount of like willpower. And the way I like to look at it is like when you play a video game, like we have HP and we have MP. HP is obviously like physical, working out, are we sleeping, etc.
Yeah.
And then MP is like, our spells, and our spells are doing so nerdy of me. But
no, this is great. I'm all about this.
Yeah, it's just it's a philosophy the way I go about it because growing up playing video games. But MP, we can only do a certain amount of tasks before we run out of MP. So a Pomodoro timer, the way it works is you set a timer for example, 25 minutes. And within those 25 minutes, you're just doing deep work. You have no distractions, no nothing. So for 25 minutes, I'm just going to code, or 25 minutes, I'm just going to design. I'm not going to touch anything else. And then once that 25-minute timer goes off, no matter what, you stop what you're doing and you take like a 10-minute break to just walk around, and it's just detaching immediately. So you don't get sucked into, I'm sure most people know if you're working on something for like 3 hours straight, by the time you're like two hours in, your brain is going to start to have some sort of fatigue. And I realized it's good to get those like detachment breaks, even when things are going good. But it stops the MP from depleting fully as fast as it would because you have a lot of stuff to do in the day.
Is that something you stick with for a whole work day, or is that something that like when you come home after you're done, working your 9 to 5, that you come home and kind of set up your tasks that way? Because this is super interesting to me.
I'll be honest, it sometimes doesn't go smoothly sometimes with work because, sometimes I'm sure, you'll get thrown into a meeting or when you have to do things with other people. When I'm given the option to do it, if I'm working on something solo at work or at home, yeah, I'll definitely jump into that. And I'll try to do it like Instagram, for example. Even you'll see when I take stories of what I'm working on, most of the time it's during that 10-minute little window. And I'm just like, okay, I'm going to show people what I'm working on. And then after that, I'm going to go back to working on it. But yeah, I try to make it a life philosophy, dude. Even when it comes down to just like cleaning up, you just got to do it.
Going back to thinking a bit more creatively, obviously chasing inspiration is great, but do you think that there's such a thing as going too far down the rabbit hole? So over conceptualizing versus just doing action and getting things on the screen or on the paper and just kind of out of your head?
I definitely believe in that. I realize there are some times where this happens when we get big daunting tasks, and we'll get huge tasks, and we'll start maybe to wireframe these ideas and draw, this is how we're going to go about it, and we'll get so sucked into the process of planning rather than actually taking initial action. Don't get me wrong, I believe that there's a certain amount of planning that goes into every task. For example, with one of my coworkers, he just joined and he came with this really interesting concept. We sat in a room for 8 minutes, and for those 8 minutes, every 1 minute we drew out a different concept for a solution within the app. And I realized when we were just rushing through it, kind of just like randomly drafting up these concepts in our head, everything went by so much smoother. It only took me 8 minutes to find this solution rather than sometimes when I'm sitting there, I'll be planning for like 30 minutes. So sometimes, if we combine a mixture of the both, like we're taking action quickly with planning and we get it done and we spend like 10 minutes just planning, hardcore planning, not really thinking about it. Then we jump right into it. If you mix the two of those, I believe that, you'll get a really optimal solution. But yeah, sometimes there's over conceptualizing.
I definitely agree with that too. Is the reason I kind of put that question in there is I feel like a lot of times I found myself doing this too, that I have all these ideas in my head that are great, but they're just ideas. So if I dwell on those too much and nothing gets done, that's arguably even more counterintuitive than not having ideas at all.
Totally. I believe like it's really good to write down ideas. I've noticed there's something called, another thing that I think is really cool is, you can look this up on the internet too. It's called impossible, like an impossible list. I don't know if you've heard of it before.
No, this is still new to me too. This is great.
Oh man, it's so cool. So if you look up an impossible list, you'll see tons of people wrote these. I even wrote one myself on one, like a random website I have. And it's essentially you just writing down the most quote unquote impossible ideas for your life. Like on mine, it's just tons of stuff. It's like hobby based, careers, like where do you want to see yourself in your career, how much do you want to make X amount of revenue on YouTube, like it's just random ideas that you have that you'd like to complete in your life. It's just random ideas. It's a list of just like, it's not so random, but it's a whole bunch of like conjugated ideas that you have that you would love to complete in your life. It just kind of gives you this sort of like framework, I would say. Like you can look at it here and there. It's like, oh, like I want to do something new, and you look at your impossible list and it's like, oh, I want to learn how to pop shove it on my skateboard. I'm going to go do that. And it's just things like that are really cool. And then you can align those with when you're writing, like, I don't know, like your 1-year goals or your 10-year goals. So the idea of an impossible list is definitely something that I always suggest to people.
I've noticed that, like myself, you've been kind of delving into the world of Stoicism. So for people who are listening who aren't aware, it's a philosophical school of thought that people like Tim Ferriss and Ryan Holiday and those guys have kind of brought it back into the mainstream. Personally, for me, it's been hugely impactful, but how has discovering Stoicism kind of changed the way you tackle problems, maybe both professionally and personally?
I don't even remember how I discovered it, probably through Tim Ferriss or somebody. And I have Ryan Holiday's book, The Daily Stoic. And just reading, a piece of knowledge from one of these Stoic philosophers, oh man, it just connects so well at every right time in your life. I read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
That's my favorite.
And yes, dude, these books, they get me so excited whenever someone brings it up. I'm just like, oh man, it's amazing. I highly recommend it for everyone because you get really grounded in terms of when you start reading about Stoicism and you read the viewpoints that these guys had. And for example, I'm blanking on his name. It's the other philosopher. There's Marcus Aurelius, then there's another one.
The other two big guys are Seneca the Younger and Epictetus.
Epictetus, yes, Epictetus. Epictetus's background, I think he was a slave.
Yeah, he was a born slave, and it's definitely a parallel because I think they were about 100 years apart. We're going really historical on this one. I wasn't expecting to go this deep, but that's okay. Yeah, he was a born slave, and to counterbalance that, again, for people who don't know, Marcus Aurelius, he was actually one of the emperors of Rome. So it was kind of an ideal that someone who was very prolific and arguably the ruler of the free world at the time, and then someone who was also probably considered at the lowest end of society, someone who was a born slave, but they both held the exact same ideals, which actually I just realized I didn't really explain. So Stoicism is kind of more or less, to really sum it up, is trying to be virtuous in all the actions that you have. It's a good kind of guideline of dealing with a lot of things that life can throw at you, like struggles and strifes and, death of loved ones and pretty heavy stuff. But I think the quote by Marcus Aurelius kind of sums it up the best for me, where he says, you have power over your thoughts, not outside events. Realize this and you'll find strength.
Some powerful stuff. I've realized Stoicism, definitely when you start to read about Stoicism and you start to realize, how good some of us have it in terms of being a designer or being a developer. It's like you're doing these things that are literally manifesting ideas into reality. You read about these Stoics and you're like, wow, like I really have it good. And this definitely applied to me when I used to complain about certain things like crazy. But now it's just like, dude, I have it so good. I shouldn't even be complaining about I can't figure out a design solution, or I don't have many Instagram followers, just stuff like that. When you start reading into Stoicism, you're just like, wow, you will be blown away. I almost guarantee that it should blow away about anyone as long as you have an open mind.
What is kind of your favorite method of expanding your mind? You know, is it through reading books? Is it through listening to podcasts? Is it through watching things? Is it through all three?
It definitely comes down to, having a little bit of everything sometimes. For expanding my mind, I would say it's good to get different sides of spectrums for a lot of things. That's why I like to often, read up on programmers and see what type of issues that programmers are going with, because, you learn about the limitations of a website. And when you're designing a website, you can start to piece up like, oh, we can't really do this. But, since I read about programming, it helps given some sort of insight. But in terms of, I don't know if you want me to drop any of the resources and stuff that I listen to. And
yeah, you
YouTube.
Absolutely can if you want to. It's not a bad thing.
Oh, yes, I totally do. So there's a couple of YouTube channels. I'm sure many people have heard of it. I like to listen to Impact Theory is a great channel, School of Greatness, and then those two are like very interview based. I think they're like podcasts, but they interview a lot of really amazing people. And then where I go from there is I see these amazing people, and then I dive deeper into their content, and then I find out people like, I know a lot of people also know about like Gary Vaynerchuk. I know he's super popular, and I remember watching his stuff a long time ago. I think he played a big role in terms of like just pumping me up every morning.
Yeah.
When I was driving to work, I'd be like, all right, I'm going to go crush it today. I'm going to do a whole bunch of work. Going back to like reading about and listening to opposite sides of the spectrum, it's good to get content like Gary V that's like very pump up, like do work, no complaining. But then it's also good to get sides of like Stoicism, because then it's like you're kind of mixing the two, and then you can really find the ideal answers for you, is what I feel.
That's definitely true, because I love Gary. The first time I heard him, I actually went over this, I think, in the first episode, but I thought that he was kind of like an asshole and this, that, and the other. But then for some reason, I was like, let me try to dive in a little bit more. And while I definitely don't agree with everything he says, because no one's perfect, and I'm never going to blindly say that anyone is 100% right all the time, I definitely agree with you that he definitely gives me that kind of shot of adrenaline, and I love Gary's content. It's definitely really good pump up material.
Another guy, he's a military background. He did the book Extreme Ownership. His name is Jocko Willink, and he has these podcasts where, and most of the time, they're not kind of for the faint of heart. They're like 3 hours long, and he reads these books based off like military stories, and he just has such a like dramatic voice. And when he reads them, and you read about like the hardships that some of these guys in the military go through, and like there was this guy he was interviewing that had both of his legs like removed because of he stepped on a mine. This guy was just talking about how he ran a marathon, I think in every state or something like that.
Whoa.
It was just insane, right? Jocko's podcast, he talks with these like really hardened dudes, and it's just such a grounding thing to me.
Now I kind of want to go over Instagram and kind of specifically your account. Your engagement on that account is incredible for the number of followers that you have. What are some quick tips you could share on how to build an online community?
Going back to Gary Vee, he has this video or blog posting as well. It's called the $80 Instagram kind of technique. It's very like big right now. A lot of people love it. Some parts I agree with, like, yeah, it's great to go and comment on the top post, and yeah, you get featured. But personally, I'm sure he's brought it up in a lot of his videos. I believe that the number one key to growing a social media community is actually focusing on building the relationships between these people, and don't look at it so much as followers. I like to look at it, as corny as it sounds, I like to look at it as like friends.
Yeah. So
like these guys are like my friends, and I always make sure there's some sort of, value, like you're giving some sort of value, and you're not posting, it's not their job to look at what you're up to, and no one's being forced to look at what you're up to. You really have to focus on building a relationship with people. I have so many post notifications turned on. You won't even believe it. for a lot of people, including yourself. It's like when I see you guys post, I go in there and like I want to see what everyone's up to. And there's this quote: "To be the most interesting, you have to be the most interested."
Ooh, I like that.
I believe that. Yes, I believe it to the fullest. And I've realized, I've owned an account before this called OS Japan. That was when I kind of started all the social media stuff, because at first I was just like, oh, I like anime. I like Japan. I'm just going to post pictures of Japan and stuff like that. That just took off. And I stopped really putting support into it when I reached around, I think it was around 20K. I don't know. I just kind of fell off, and I realized that there's a certain amount of people that I really want to connect with, and that was the programmers and the tech people, because that's what I do every day, and I can really build that relationship. And I believe that's where the growth and engagement comes from for me, is because I found my tribe. I found the niche of people that I can relate with the most, and then I've gained these skills with when it comes down to just commenting and being there for people and DMing sometimes, just asking how people are doing, or not always looking for what's in it for me. I also believe that there's a lot of people out there. I've come into contact, I'm sure once you start growing a sizable account, you're getting a lot of people are going to ask you questions on how do I grow and stuff. And there's something I tell people to really watch out about, is to never get carried away with the number. It's like, don't start to identify yourself, with that number, or they ask for certain tips. And I always tell people, don't get obsessed with how many followers you have, and always kind of post your mind. Gary Vee does another amazing job at this, and it's the idea of document versus creating. And I believe with a lot of these accounts that are meant to be like personal usage versus big community pages, the idea of documenting your life and documenting what's going on, it's really cool for yourself and for other people as well, because it's like I can look back a few weeks ago and I look at my journal, or I look at like a YouTube video I made, and it's like, wow, this is how I was thinking. That's really cool. So you can see the process definitely when you're documenting versus, trying to create this ideal masterpiece of an image on Instagram that matches the latest setup. And I say never get too caught up in those things. And people, they'll really flock towards you if they see that you're being genuine and honest, and, you're trying to create a relationship. So it's all a long-term game is what I feel, especially with like everything, actually. It's those micro. Gary Vee also brings this up. It's like he's such a good guy. You have these micro fast interactions on a daily basis. Like you have this to-do list, and you're crushing it. Like you're doing things that are making big impact. But at the same time, you have to have the patience, saying that I know that if I it's just like working out. When people work out, like they're consistently working on something with intensity, but they know in terms of the long run, it's going to take 10 years of this micro intensity. So the same thing can be applied to things like Instagram. Like on my to-do list right now, I have 1 hour. It's scheduled in 1 hour of like social media growth, which is pretty much me jumping around a whole bunch of accounts, leaving my 2 cents and what I think. And hopefully there can be something built off of that. Otherwise, I gave it my all.
Could you please describe the first 90 minutes of your day, being specific as possible? So for instance, if you wake up early, what time do you wake up? If you drink coffee, what kind do you drink? So on and so forth.
My perfect morning would start with me waking up at 5. I'd get up, make my bed. It's always the first thing I like to do. It's like to start my day with a win, brush my teeth, then meditate for at least 6 minutes. And after meditating, I'll set the water and I'll make some tea, most likely Earl Grey or some green tea. Lately, I've been doing, I don't want a little plug in on one of the tea brands I like a lot. It's called Zest Tea. And it's like it's going to sound really bad. It's like a highly caffeinated tea, but it doesn't have this humongous crash like coffee does. And I like it. It's kind of pricey. I make my tea, and then I'll jump straight into Tim Ferriss's morning pages. I pull out my notebook and I kind of just write whatever's on my mind for the day. And yeah, it's just, free form writing, and I'll set a timer for like 3 minutes, and I'll just write, empty the brain. Then I'll get on to, writing in my bullet journal, writing down my daily goals and what I need to accomplish. I'll try to highlight at least 3 things that will make the day awesome. So yeah, it's just 3 simple or high impactful tasks that I know once I finish, I'll feel good and I'll be able to go to sleep. After that, I'll honestly just log into my computer, and then I'll go from, this is funny, I'll actually log into my computer and check my Todoist app, and then that's where I have certain things. It's like goals that will span throughout the entire week. So these are things that might transfer over to the next day rather than, the bullet journals tends to be daily. And sometimes I do transfer, but to avoid forgetting certain things, I'll set it up on Todoist. And I love the app. I love the design team. I love everything about them. It's one of my favorites. But after checking that out, I'll probably, I would say I would dive right into emails, and I'd listen to a podcast, or I'll listen to, some sort of really uplifting content, things to really shift you into gear for today. Or it's either that, or lately I've been actually tuning into like a fireplace. Like I'll play this fireplace soundtrack, and I'll just have a fire going.
Just to interrupt you real quick, I feel like lo-fi hip-hop anime beats 24/7 on YouTube is highly overrated in comparison to the standbys like Rain on Glass, Fireplace, Noisy Cafe. So that's just my 2 cents.
I actually, honestly, I think I can agree. I'm going to sound like such a hipster, but like lately, lo-fi hip hop, it's great. It's great. Don't get me wrong. I love it. But when I ever tune into those 24/7 channels, I feel like it's not as curated, and most of the time it just all sounds the same.
Yeah.
I love people like Joji. I like Joji's music. It's great.
Yeah, Joji's is good.
It's very flavorful. But yeah, tuning into stuff like, oh, dude, this is super nerdy of me again, but like the Skyrim soundtrack is amazing.
Yeah, those are underrated in comparison to lo-fi hip-hop anime beats.
Oh, dude, totally. Skyrim, you turn on the Skyrim ambient soundtrack with like fireplace or like a river. Oh man,
that just sounds like comfy.
So much. Yeah, I get so much work done. So yeah, I'll tune into that sometimes in the morning, and at that point, I'm like into flow. Those emails are getting knocked out, and honestly, by the time I finish those emails, it's time for me to go to work. I've been very strict about when I'm in my car, I actually listen to a lot of audiobooks, and that's how I crank out a lot of reading. Sometimes, going back a little bit, going in reverse, if I have more time, depending on, I probably do have time if it's 5 a.m., I wake up at 5. I'll probably read a book for around 20 minutes. When I first started, here's a good tip for anybody that wants to get more into reading, is to just start at 25 pages a day, because those things really add up. Then I realized as you go on, your reading speed increases, and then you should just set it by a timer, because you'll probably blow through 25 pages in no time.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the perfect morning for me.
What's something you're obsessed with? So not in like a world peace kind of really large picture way, but even if it's something silly and small and stuff that people might not necessarily know about you, what's something you're obsessed with?
Something I'm overly obsessed with that I don't show too often is doodling. Like I love like Japanese like doodling, and just like, it's probably, actually taking a couple steps back, it's probably obsessed with Japan. I would say like anime, and like when I see people doodling with that kind of style, I love it. I'm always hanging out in like Little Tokyo here in Los Angeles, and yeah, it's amazing to me, and I'm so overly obsessed with it.
And maybe not so secret, but yeah, I'm in the same boat. I love Japan. What's been some stuff you've been watching lately, like anime wise, to really go down in the nitty gritty with the geek nerd, that type of level stuff? We might as well just go in full, So what's some stuff you've been watching?
Lately I actually just tuned into, I think it's called Pop Team Epic.
Yes.
And
I saw that.
It's amazing.
I love Pop Team Epic.
Oh man. So, going back to when we started recording, when I mentioned, things that give inspiration, Pop Team Epic is literally loaded with inspiration in terms of color palettes and all these things. It's such a
textures.
I just don't know, like, who comes up with some of these skit ideas. I just don't get it, because it's so random.
If anybody on here has never watched anime or doesn't really have an interest, Pop Team Epic would be the one I'd recommend to anybody, mainly because they're short. They're like kind of skit based, like maybe if you think of like a Robot Chicken or a Portlandia kind of thing, where it's like very short micro sketches in like a 10-minute period, and all of them are just, hilarious. And I would definitely recommend that to anybody who'd want to watch.
And going back on the anime thing, I don't know if you have an all-time favorite anime movie, but definitely Ghost in the Shell is...
That's up there.
It's so up there in terms of... It's not for everyone. I know that because it's so deep in terms of like the philosophy of all that stuff. But yeah, just had to plug that in.
No, Gits is a good plug. I won't deny it. If you could get a billboard and have anything written on it, what would it say?
I would say don't focus on the how, focus on the why. And going back from that, a lot of people I've noticed, even myself growing up, people are focused on how will I get there? How am I going to, become XYZ? And I realized, that eventually kind of burns out compared to if you're focused on why do I need to do this? Why do I need to do that? Because it really creates this sort of, we all know motivation is a very temporary thing. Some days we feel good, some days we don't feel good. But I believe if a person is focused on why they need to do it, they create this sort of drive now. And it's very powerful. And it's just not good to pour all your energy into how am I going to get this done versus why am I going to get this done. I'm sure you can go back and I'm sure you have a really powerful reason on why you created this podcast. And when you have things like that in the back of your mind, and if you write down on a piece of paper and you focus on why I'm doing this, it's that constant reminder, and it creates this burning like fuel for the drive on getting whatever you need to do done. And it won't matter anymore on the how, because you'll find that one solid reason why. I believe that it's just so much more powerful. Yeah, this was it's a deeply philosophical tech talk.
Yeah, hey, I'm okay with it. It mixes it up every once in a while, and I mean, even outside of that too, I've definitely set up the show to be, in my mind, I haven't really said this too much, but I want it to be the most technical, non-technical show. I want to talk to some of the most technical people, but find more of the commonalities, things like this, like mindset and achieving your goals.
I can't agree with that anymore. It's a lot of us in the tech industry, I realize sometimes our focus a little more. I see it on the how. A lot of people I see this so much on bigger accounts. People are always asking for the latest and greatest framework and et cetera. Same with design. It's similar questions asking about design tools. But I realize there's a lot of people, we have a lot in common than a lot of us realize, because everyone's kind of, it's funny, I just put this in my newsletter actually, but everyone is kind of searching for a meaning. It's just something that people need to realize.
Where can people find you? Where are you at on the internet? Do you have any sort of projects or kind of cool stuff that you're working on that you want to share with the internet as a whole? This is your platform and spot to do it.
Oh, wow. Thanks a lot. I would say the number one thing I'm pushing right now is definitely my Instagram account, which is multi-Micah, multi-MULTIMICAH. And you can also find me on Twitter, which is _Micah Carroll. I'm sure we can plug this in somewhere.
Yeah, everything's going to be in the show notes, especially all the other stuff we talked about before too. So it's going to be pretty long, but it's all going to be in there.
Perfect. Yeah, but in terms of a project I'm working on, everything is in development right now. So if you just follow me on those platforms, you'll see it for sure.
So what's one question that you want to ask the audience?
What is your why? Like, why are you doing what you're doing right now?
If you made it this far, thank you for listening to Small Talk Tech. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and over at smalltalktech.com. If you like what you've heard, the best way to help us out early on is to leave us a review on iTunes. Finally, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them directly to matt@smalltalktech.com. That's MAT@smalltalktech.com. Thanks again.